They didn't have names that night, just numbers and silence, standing under the swing of lantern light in a saloon that smelled like sweat and cheap judgment. 3 women auctioned off like property nobody wanted to claim. He didn't speak, didn't ask where they came from or what they'd done to end up there. He just stepped forward, not to rescue, not to make anything right, only to stop the laughter. This isn't a tale of heroism or romance. It's about what happens when a man leaves his door unlocked and lets dignity walk in on its own, where silence isn't punishment but permission to breathe. Stay till the end. Some stories aren't loud, but they're the ones that last. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Part 1. The rancher didn't come to save anyone. The heat in Red Hollow that day clung low and still, the kind that made sweat crawl down your back without apology. Dust curled off the street with each wagon pass, and the air inside the saloon felt thick with spilled beer, broken laughter, and the kind of cruelty that liked an audience. Bo Callahan stepped in without meaning to stay long. He wasn't a drinker, not anymore, not since Martha died. He'd come to town for oat money owed by Hiram Cobb, who was conveniently hard to find any time folks had receipts. Bo figured if he couldn't catch Hiram, he'd at least sit a while in the shade, maybe ask after a barrel of nails for the barn. He didn't expect to see them. 3 women lined up beneath the oil lanterns, backs straight, but hands clenched, eyes pinned to nothing. They didn't look like brides, didn't look like anything the room pretended them to be. One was younger, couldn't have been more than 19. She had hair tied back like she was used to kitchens, not crowds. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of her dress like they were trying to disappear into the seams. Another stood tall, wide-shouldered, with dirt still crusted in the folds of her skirt, and something fierce pressed into her jaw. The third held a small book tight to her chest with one arm, one eye cloudy and blind, the other sharp enough to cut. The crowd, mostly ranch hands and saddle drifters, hooted and hollered like cattle boys at branding time. Luther Griggs leaned against the bar, drunk and pleased, smacking a poker table like he'd won something precious. "Auction starts at a half bottle," he called, "or trade me your best boots." Somewhere, someone laughed. Another said, "Hope the tall one don't bite." Bo stood still. The sweat on his back turned cold. He hadn't come to save anybody. He didn't believe in that sort of thing, but what he saw wasn't trade or celebration. It was shame made public, shame dressed up like entertainment. And it twisted something in him that hadn't stirred since the last breath left Martha's chest. He thought about her then, how folks had laughed at her once too, not when she was dying, but before. The way people do when they're too scared to admit they're watching something sacred. Bo stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten or bargain, just reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out everything he had. 2 silver dollars, a half-worn coin, and a concho he'd meant to use on a saddle. He dropped them on the table. No one cheered. No one stopped him. The room just hushed, slow and unsettled, like wind dying before a dust storm. One coin rolled off the edge and landed on the floor with a soft clink, like a full stop at the end of a sentence nobody'd meant to say. Bo looked at Luther, then at the women. "That's the last I'll spend in this place," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't kind either, just firm, like the way some men shut a gate. He turned without waiting for a response. Behind him, the room began to murmur again, low, uncertain, like the heat outside had followed them in. He didn't look back to see if they followed, but they did. Outside, the sun sat lower, bleeding into the dust. The wagon creaked as Bo checked the hitch, not saying a word. Miriam, the one with the book, climbed into the back without needing help. She moved like she knew how to leave places. Cora paused at the side rail, tested its strength, then nodded once before settling near the bags of grain. Ellie, the youngest, stood for a moment in the dirt, her hands still wrapped around her elbows like they were the only thing holding her in place. She looked at Bo. Not in gratitude, not in fear, just a tired, hollow sort of waiting. He offered no words. She climbed up. The road back to the ranch was quiet. No birds, no talk, just the sound of old wheels rolling over land that had seen too many summers. Bo didn't look behind him often, but once, just once. He checked the mirror strapped to the side. 3 shapes, 3 silences, and for the first time in years, the space behind him felt full, not in a way that could be spoken, just enough to make the cabin no longer feel like a place where things had ended, but maybe a place where something unnamed might begin. Part 2, no thanks spoken, but no one resisted. They didn't speak, not even to each other, as they followed Bo out of the saloon. The doors swung shut behind them, creaking once like the breath of a town that preferred to watch rather than intervene. The hush outside was heavier than the noise inside, broken only by a coyote's call somewhere out beyond the last corral fence. Miriam was the first to step off the boardwalk. She didn't glance back at the saloon, or at the men still leaning by the windows with drinks half raised, watching the scene like it was a stage play. She just walked, steady, upright, with something in her gait that said she'd already had to leave worse places behind. Cora moved slower. She checked the wagon hitch, hand brushing the harness, eyes scanning the wheels, like she expected something to break or someone to follow. Ellie lingered, her arms folded across her chest, as if she didn't trust the air not to bruise her. The porch step seemed taller than it should have been. When she finally climbed down, it was with the stiffness of someone who'd gone too long being still. Bo didn't say anything, just climbed up to the wagon seat, took the reins in calloused hands. He didn't look back at the saloon, or at them, not directly. The wagon creaked under the weight, not just of the 3 women, but of what none of them said aloud. Bo's team, old sorrels named Bay and Dusty, stepped slowly down the main street. One shoe clanged against a loose stone, echoing off the shuttered windows of the general store. No one asked where. They were going. Bo didn't offer. They passed the chapel, dark inside, past the schoolhouse, its bell rope frayed and idle. The further they got from town, the more the night took over. Coyotes again, wind lifting dust off the hardpan. The sky turned deep blue, no moon, just a scatter of stars like old nail heads punched into black wood. Ellie sat nearest the back of the wagon, fingers still gripping the edge tight, like the boards might give out beneath her if she let go. Cora sat beside her, one knee bouncing just slightly. Miriam leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, eyes scanning the horizon. None of them spoke. Bo kept his eyes on the trail. His land sat a little past the ridge, about 4 miles out. Not so far it was forgotten, but far enough nobody came unless they meant to. The sound of the wagon filled the silence. Wood on wheel, harness leather creaking, hoof on gravel. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet in a way none of them had felt in a long while. A quiet that didn't press, didn't ask, didn't pry. At one point Ellie looked up at the stars. She didn't say anything, but she looked like she hadn't seen them in a while, like she'd forgotten they were there. Cora shifted and pulled her shawl tighter. Miriam pressed a hand against her book, like it might settle something inside her. Bo flicked the reins once to adjust their speed as they reached the edge of his land. No gate, just 2 weather-worn posts that used to hold a sign, long since taken by wind or time. A single lantern burned on his porch, left from before sunset. It cast a low glow that reached the front step and stopped short, like even light had its limits. When the wagon halted, Bo didn't jump down right away. He sat for a moment, hand resting on the brake lever, listening. For what, he didn't know? Maybe for the voice of his wife. Ghost of her in that porch chair. Maybe for the sound of doubt. Or permission. He finally stood, climbed down, and without speaking, offered his hand to Miriam. She didn't take it. She climbed down herself. Cora came next, landing with a thud of boot on dirt, her shoulders squared but jaw tight. Ellie climbed slowest, one bare foot, then the other. She paused on the edge of the wagon bed like someone about to leap into water. Then she stepped down. The three of them stood there, shadows on a stranger's porch. Bo pushed open the door. The hinge squealed. He didn't gesture for them to come in, didn't say they could, but he didn't block the way either. Inside, a small table, 3 chairs, a stone hearth with a cold pile of ash, a shelf with 2 cups and a cracked plate, a cast-iron skillet still blackened from the morning's bread. Miriam walked in first. She chose the bed by the window and didn't look at him. Cora dropped her satchel, just a rope-tied sack, and curled up on the braided rug like it was familiar. Ellie didn't step inside right away. She stood at the door, eyes moving over every board, every nail, every shadow. Then she crossed the threshold. Bo took a seat on the porch, the one his wife used to favor. It creaked beneath him. He sat still for a long time, watching the dust settle behind where the wagon had rolled in. The door behind him stayed open, like the house itself hadn't yet decided if it was ready to hold new people. He didn't feel like a rescuer. He didn't feel like anything, just a man who'd had enough of watching shame be sold for sport. Inside, a floorboard shifted. He didn't turn, but his porch didn't feel empty anymore. It felt almost like it was waiting for something, something that didn't have a name yet, but maybe didn't need one. Part 3, a house that never invited but never turned away. The house didn't speak. It creaked. It settled. It breathed the dust of its corners, but it didn't speak, which was maybe the only kind of welcome the 3 women could stand. Miriam rose first the next morning. She moved quiet through the main room, her bare feet barely whispering against the worn wood planks. The sleeves of her dress were rolled to her elbows. She didn't ask permission when she opened the door to the yard. She just stepped into the chill and began pumping water from the well out back. Bo had already been up long before sunup. He'd fed the horses, split a few logs, then sat on the porch, staring at the line where the grass met the dust. He didn't expect her to be up. But when he saw her, sleeves pushed back and hair pulled tight, he didn't say anything, just watched. Cora stirred second. She didn't go far, only to the hearth. She sat on her knees for a long time, watching the firebox. It was empty, still black from someone else's winters. Then wordlessly she started stacking kindling. Ellie stayed in the room longest. She'd curled up beside the rocker, blanket still drawn tight. Her face was half hidden in shadow, like she couldn't quite decide if daylight had earned its way in. Bo brought in an armful of firewood around mid-morning, set it down beside the stove. Didn't say a word, just nodded once to Cora, who nodded back, like a quiet deal had passed between them. By midday, Miriam had swept the front step and boiled coffee in a rusted tin pot that hissed too much. She poured it into chipped mugs without asking who wanted any. Cora fixed the door hinge, somehow. Used twine and a nail pulled from the porch beam. It didn't swing right, but it didn't hang loose anymore. Ellie still hadn't said a word, and Bo wasn't about to ask why. He wasn't a man of questions, not anymore. He figured folks spoke when something inside them got too loud to bear. Until then, silence was its own kind of respect. That afternoon, he rode the fence line. The 3 women stayed behind. He'd thought maybe they'd be gone by the time he came back, but they weren't. Instead, the front gate had been mended with scrap wire, the porch swept clean. And there was stew warming on the stove. a thin one, mostly water and onion, but it filled the air with something he hadn't smelled in years. Bo stood at the door, hand on the frame, boots not crossing in just yet. Inside, Ellie was sitting at the small table, her hands around a cup she hadn't sipped from. Miriam was darning a shirt that wasn't hers. Cora was drawing something into the ash by the hearth with a piece of kindling. A horse, maybe, or a feather. It didn't matter. What mattered was, none of them looked ready to leave. Bo stepped inside. The door closed behind him on its own. Slow, soft wear, and that's when Ellie spoke for the first time. "You got spoons?" Bo blinked, nodded. "Drawer." She didn't smile, just stood, opened it, and handed one to each woman before taking one herself. It was the smallest of things. A movement, a word, a hand extended, but Bo felt it like a crack down in the middle of something hardened. They ate in silence. Again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. This one had heat in it, like coals under old ash. That night, as the fire settled low and wind whispered through the eaves, Bo lit a lamp and sat in the corner chair, polishing his boots like he always did. Not because they needed it, but because it was something his hands knew when his mind was crowded. Ellie pulled her blanket tighter and watched him. "You got a wife?" she asked. Bo looked up, eyes steady, then shook his head once. "Had." A pause. "Long time? Long enough?" Nothing more was said, but for Ellie the answer was enough. Not because of what it revealed, but because he didn't hide behind lies or stories. Sometimes the truth didn't need more than one line. Sometimes kindness was just not asking too much. She lay back down, slept deeper than she had in years, and Bo, for the first time since his wife passed, didn't put the second cup away. He left it on the table, empty still, but waiting. Like the house itself. No invitation spoken, but no one turned away. Part 4, gestures never spoken out loud. By the time the second morning stretched its slow fingers through the cracked window panes, the women were already moving, not from orders, not from expectation, just from the deep, ancient need to prove, maybe not to others, but to themselves, that they were still capable of more than being pitied. Ellie was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, standing far enough from the stove that the heat wouldn't touch her too harsh. Her hands trembled as she cracked the eggs. 2 good ones, one half spoiled, but she scraped the bad part out with a kind of quiet care. The skillet hissed. She added no salt, maybe out of habit, maybe because flavor still felt like a luxury meant for someone else. She didn't hum, she didn't smile. But she cooked for strangers without being asked. That was something. Cora was out back before Bo had even come in from tending the horse trough. She'd found the axe by the fence post. Dull, old, handle cracked at the end, but she used it like she'd known it all her life. Her shoulders moved in rhythm, back straight, swing even, arms pulling like each split log was a kept promise she hadn't broken. The pile grew. Bo didn't stop her, just offered a nod as he passed. She didn't return it, but the next log was struck even harder. Miriam sat on the front step, her blind eye turned toward the sunlight, the other scanning the horizon. She had the same tattered book in her lap, a small leather-bound volume with corners softened by too many hands, a primer maybe, or poetry. No one asked. At one point she stood, walked to the window, wiped away weeks of dust with the sleeve of her blouse, then sat back down without a word, like she couldn't bear to look out until the view was clear. Bo spent most of the morning in the barn, fixing the stable door that always slammed shut when the wind turned. There was no list, no chores passed around, but the house began to move like a clock finally remembering it had hands. By noon the hearth was warm again. Ellie placed 4 plates on the table, none of them matched. 2 were chipped. She stood staring at them longer than she should have, like she was trying to remember if there was ever a time in her life when she'd set out more than one plate and expected to eat from one of them. When Cora came in with a fresh stack of firewood, she didn't say anything either, just noticed the plates, dropped the bundle by the stove, sat down like it was her right. Bo came in next, hanging his hat near the door, glancing around like a man noticing his own home for the first time. Then Miriam walked in, poured a little hot water into the pot, and set out 4 cups. Ellie flinched when Miriam came close. Not much. Just a half step back, almost invisible, but Miriam noticed. Still, she poured tea into the chipped cup in front of Ellie and didn't look her in the eye, just placed it down and walked away. That act, simple, silent, unwound something that had been coiled tight in Ellie's chest. She didn't drink it, not yet, but she didn't move it either. It stayed there. Heron at dusk, Bo stood on the porch again. Same spot as the night before, one boot crossed over the other, coffee in hand. Behind him the house crackled with movement, Cora sharpening the old kitchen knife by candlelight, Miriam scribbling something in the margin of her book, Ellie rinsing the dishes, sleeves wet to the elbows. No music, no laughter, but sound, real sound, not the echo of emptiness. Bo watched the wind stir the grass line. For years this land had been a place for weather and ghosts. Tonight it held the rhythm of 4 people, learning how not to be afraid of belonging. Just before turning in, Bo passed through the kitchen. Ellie was still there, drying her hands on her skirt, staring at the window as though half afraid her reflection might answer. He paused beside the table, picked up the 4th cup, turned it once in his hand, then set it back down, firm, gentle. "You cooked," he said, first words to her since she'd arrived. Ellie nodded once. "That smell," he added, almost to himself. "Smells like someone meant to stay." She didn't reply, didn't need to. Bo walked out, footsteps soft on the wood. Ellie reached for the tea, took one sip, winced, too strong, but drank again because someone noticed, not with praise, just with presence, and sometimes that was louder than anything else. Part 5. The town that never touched, but always watched. By the end of the week, the wind wasn't the only thing whispering through Red Hollow. It didn't take much. One wagon rode back to town for horse feed. One glimpse of a woman's shadow behind Bo Callahan's front window, and the saloon gossip turned to teeth. "They say he brought 3 of 'em home," muttered old Jeb behind the general store, eyes squinting like truth might be hiding between cracks in the hitching post. "All bought same night, didn't even blink." "I heard he's making them take turns," spat another voice, low and curling like spoiled milk. In a town where most men worked too hard and the rest drank too much, scandal was the only thing that walked without tripping. The thing was, Bo didn't care what they said. But the women, well, they noticed. Cora heard it first. At the well behind the feed store, she was hauling water in the quiet morning, sleeves pushed high, her grip firm on the rope. A teenage boy, maybe 15, whispered something to a friend and laughed. Cora didn't ask what, just stared at him long enough that the boy looked away and muttered an apology he didn't quite mean. She carried the bucket home like it was heavier than it used to be. Miriam was next. She came across a church flyer tacked crooked near the post office, something about a special council hearing on moral standards in the valley. Nothing direct, but she could read between lines. Used to be a teacher, after all. She folded the flyer once, twice, slipped it into her book like she might have use for it later. Ellie felt it most, not from strangers, but from the way old women paused their sweeping as she passed, the way children's eyes lingered too long, the way one man tipped his hat not in greeting, but like he pitied her, like he already knew her story. The shame crept back under her skin, slow and familiar, like a fever returning in the night. That afternoon she sat on the porch, broom across her lap, unmoving. Bo came around from the barn, noticed the stillness, and didn't speak right away, just leaned against the railing. Then, soft as if speaking to the wind, "You stop sweeping because you're tired, or because folks made you forget you have hands." Ellie looked down, then up. Her mouth moved like it wanted to explain, but no words came. Bo didn't press, just said, "Keep sweeping. Let 'em say what they will. Dust don't care if it's judged." It wasn't a sermon. Bo used to give those once in another life. But this wasn't about saving souls, just about letting them breathe. The next day, Alma Greeley came by, widow, tight-lipped, known for having her nose in everyone's porch but her own. She didn't knock, just walked up as Ellie swept again. Same porch, same silence. "Young lady," Alma began, arms crossed, voice pinched like the hem of a too-small dress. "I hope you know they're talking." Ellie paused, didn't speak. Alma huffed. "You can't just walk out of a saloon and expect folks to forget where you came from." Still, Ellie stayed quiet, swept once, then again. Alma's eyes darted to the side, to the windows. Then she added, "You're not what they say. I know that. I've seen women swept under before." Then, softer, like it pained her, "They talk big. Ain't one of 'em ever swept a porch?" And with that, she reached into her basket, pulled out a small loaf of bread wrapped in a handkerchief, and placed it beside the broom handle. Then she left. No blessing, no apology, just the gift of something warm that didn't ask questions. Bo came home just before dusk, saw the loaf, smelled it. "Alma?" he asked. Ellie nodded. Bo took the bread inside, came back with 2 mugs of coffee, set one beside her without a word, sat beside her. Then after a while, "I didn't save anyone. I just left the door open." Ellie blinked, then said very softly for the first time since arriving, "That's more than anyone else did." The wind picked up. It carried the words away, but not before they landed, somewhere deep in that old ranch house that still had room for new sounds. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Part 6. A bottle don't make a contract. The trouble didn't come with horses. It walked up the hill slow and smiling, with a limp in its left leg and a bottle-sized dent in its conscience. Luther Griggs. Even the wind seemed to hush when he showed up, like the ground knew not to welcome him. He was grinning, that same crooked grin he used when he'd toss coins at bar girls and call it kindness. One boot dragged slightly in the dust, and his hat tipped like it had more swagger than brains beneath it. Bo spotted him first. He was tending the fence line, re-wrapping wire where winter had pulled it loose, when he saw Griggs making his way up the path like he owned something, waiting at the end of it. Bo didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood straight, hands dusted with rust, and watched the man come on. Griggs stopped 10 paces away. "Afternoon, preacher." Bo didn't answer. "Still a man of the cloth, or just a man with 3 ladies and a bed big enough?" Bo's jaw didn't move, but the stillness changed, hardened. Griggs shrugged like it was all a joke. "I'm here on account of the little one, Ellie. She's got something that belongs to me." Bo didn't blink. "No, she doesn't." Griggs smiled again, slick as mud. "Now hold on, I gave half a bottle of rye for her that night. Got a receipt of sorts. Old Pike at the saloon watched me stake my claim." Bo moved his foot just enough to plant it firm. "She's not yours." "I ain't asking to take her. Just talk. Let her choose." Bo stepped forward once. Not quick, not threatening, but final. "You bought fear. Not a person. That grin slid off Griggs's face like grease on water. He spat sideways, wiped his mouth, then leaned in, voice low. Careful, preacher. This hill don't belong to angels, just men who bleed like the rest. He turned, walked off without another word, but the dust he kicked up settled on everything. That evening the house felt different, tight, still but watching. Bo didn't mention it, didn't say Griggs's name, didn't have to. Ellie had seen him from the window. Her breath had gone shallow, her hands tightening around the edge of the table, like it might carry her somewhere else. After dinner, she didn't go to bed. She stayed by the hearth, legs tucked under her, the knife from the kitchen in her lap. It wasn't sharp anymore, blade dulled from years of cutting bread and soft vegetables, but her fingers wrapped around it like it still meant something. Bo noticed when he came back in from the porch. He didn't ask her why. He knew. He simply sat across from her in the rocking chair, quiet, like a steady wind that keeps a barn from creaking. They stayed like that for a long while, two people guarding something neither of them could name. The fire popped once, then again. She finally spoke, not looking at him. My last name used to be Jenkins, before anyone bought it off me. Bo nodded. Then Jenkins it is. Ellie blinked, tightened her grip on the dull blade, and somewhere in that flicker of firelight she unclenched her jaw, didn't smile, but didn't tremble either. Outside, the coyotes called. Inside, the ranch held still, and held steady. That night she slept with the knife on the mantel, but she slept, and Bo, for the first time in years, didn't dream of the pulpit he once stood behind. He dreamt of fences that held, and doors that didn't lock, but stayed closed all the same. Part 7. Boundaries with no walls. The air turned cooler after Griggs left. Nights dipped lower, and the cottonwoods along the creek began to yellow, the way they did when fall came quiet. Bo stacked wood on the porch without saying much. He wasn't a man for speeches, but even silence has its weight when shared too long without shape. It was Miriam who broke it, one supper steam still rising from the stew pot Cora had stirred. Miriam looked up from her chipped bowl, pushed her glasses higher on her nose, and asked straight, "You planning to marry one of us?" The question didn't land like a shot. It was softer than that. But the room still held its breath. Bo blinked once. The spoon in his hand paused over the bowl. "No," he said plain. "I don't plan to own anyone." Across the table, Cora exhaled through her nose, and the muscles in her jaw shifted like something long held in check, just let go. "Good," she muttered, dropping her spoon a bit harder than she meant to. "Long as no one crosses lines." There was no anger in her voice, just a tension born from too many rooms where the rules changed overnight, where kindness came wrapped in strings. Ellie hadn't touched her stew. She was watching them, not fearful, not frozen, just alert. Then, slow and careful, she nodded. It was the first time she'd answered something that wasn't directly spoken to her. That nod was a small thing, but to Bo, it was louder than a sermon. He set his spoon down, not because the food was bad, Cora's cooking was simple but solid, but because he didn't want to miss what came next. Nothing came next, and that was the point. They just ate. After supper, Miriam sat on the porch with her book. Ellie swept the kitchen, her strokes longer now, not the short, frantic ones of someone who expected to be interrupted. Cora stayed at the sink a while, staring out the window at the dark. Inside the house, the walls didn't lean. No doors slammed. Outside, the wind tugged but didn't howl. That night, Bo sat out by the post he'd once meant to hang a sign on, something about sermons and Sunday hours, back when he thought he'd preach again one day. He never had, and now he didn't feel the need to. He looked out toward the corral, where the moonlit fence lines stretched toward the hills like quiet vows. No ink, no ceremony, but they held just the same. A treaty had been laid that night, unwritten, unsigned, but stronger than any deed. Each person under that roof had their own room now, their own space, their own name reclaimed. Bo didn't need them to stay, and they didn't need to leave. And maybe that was the first time any of them realized you didn't have to be claimed to be kept. Sometimes being seen was enough. Part 8. Seeds from Unlikely Hands. The morning Ellie asked to go into town alone, she didn't raise her voice. She just stood at the edge of the porch while Bo tightened the saddle cinch on his bay mare. Her fingers were laced together, knuckles pale. Bo didn't ask where she was going or why. He just said, "Take Sadie. She knows the way," then handed her a canteen and a coin. Ellie didn't smile, but she touched the brim of her bonnet like it was a nod and walked toward the waiting horse with a stride that didn't hesitate. Not once. From the porch, Cora watched with one hand on her hip, the other tightening a rope she'd been mending. Miriam stood inside the screen door, book open but unread, her one good eye following the mare until it dipped behind the cottonwoods that marked the turn toward Red Hollow. Ellie didn't look back. And that somehow meant more than if she had. She returned late afternoon with a dusting of wind in her dress and a paper bundle held tight to her chest. She didn't explain where she'd been. Bo didn't ask. She walked up to him, held out the stitched pouch, canvas tied with a faded blue ribbon. "For the back garden," she said, voice steady. Bo opened it. Basil seeds, small and dry, nothing more than specks. But in his hand they felt like something sacred. "Where there's plants," Ellie added, eyes fixed on the dirt near the stoop, "there's roots." She didn't wait for him to respond, just stepped inside, her boots soft on the planks, left the scent of dust and dry sage behind her. That evening Cora patched the roof of the stable with her own jacket sleeves, said the leak above the hay bale had gotten worse and ain't nobody sleeping under rot. She didn't ask for help, didn't expect it. But Bo fetched a ladder anyway, held it steady without a word while she climbed. By week's end, the basil seeds had sprouted, tiny green specks pushing up from dark earth near the back fence. No one made mention of it, but folks walked slower past the house. The same neighbors who once gawked at 3 women under one roof now lingered near the porch, pretending to inspect the road or check for mail. Miriam started reading with the boy from down the lane, Simon, 8 years old, left half wild by a mother buried 2 winters back, and a father too drunk to bother. She didn't ask for permission, just sat on the porch one day and said, "Bring your book." When Simon frowned and said he couldn't read, Miriam handed him her old copy of Pilgrim's Progress, told him, "That's why you're here." They met every Thursday after that. He never missed a week. One afternoon, Bo came in to find a stack of old boots lined up by the door. Not his, not the women's. Turns out Miriam had offered to teach reading to the blacksmith's niece, too, and Alma Greeley's granddaughter. No one paid her. She never asked. That same week, Ellie sewed patches on Bo's work shirt, not for praise. She left it folded neatly on his bed. No note, no fanfare. But the sleeves no longer frayed, and the pocket that had sagged now held a pencil again. That pencil came in handy when Bo began sketching a new fence line, one that didn't separate mine and yours. Just a wide arc to keep out coyotes and let the chickens wander free. No one talked about who owed what. There were no tallies, no trades. They weren't repaying debts. They were just living, finally, as they chose. Part 9. The law writes in ink, not in pain. The knock came just after midday, not loud, not rushed, just a steady tap that spoke of formality and boots polished for official business. Bo wiped the sweat from his brow, laid down the fencing hammer, and opened the front door. Standing there was Sheriff Morgan, hat in hand, eyes heavy. Beside him, a man in a wool coat too fine for Red Hollow, with a leather folio under one arm and the dry expression of someone used to getting their way, with paper, not calluses. "Mr. Callahan," the stranger said, not waiting to be asked in. "Name's Eustace Finch, legal representative out of Cheyenne. I'm here on behalf of the Four Pines Saloon, which is filing claim on 3 former contractual employees who've taken unlawful leave from premises and obligations." Bo didn't speak. Behind him, Ellie stepped into the hall, clutching the doorframe. Miriam followed, slow but sure, and Cora. Cora stood behind them both with arms crossed, unreadable. Sheriff Morgan shifted his weight, as if the ground had betrayed him somehow. "They're claiming it's a breach of indenture," he muttered, almost apologetically. Finch opened his folio, produced a set of documents stamped in red wax. Each woman signed for food, lodging, and security under the employment of Four Pines. Their departure qualifies as abandonment. We are within our rights to reclaim. Miriam stepped forward, just one pace. "I'm not a receipt," she said. "I'm a person." Finch blinked, almost amused. "Ma'am, the ink on these pages—" "Paper folds easy," Bo said finally. "People don't." Finch clicked his folio shut. "Nevertheless, there's a town council hearing scheduled in 3 days. The church is involved. I suggest your household prepares." Then he tipped his hat, not out of courtesy but as punctuation, and walked off. The sheriff lingered a moment. "You know how folks can be, Bo," he said, looking at his boots. "Red Hollow. It likes its order." Bo's voice was quiet. "Then maybe it needs a better one." After the men left, silence settled like dust on the windowsills. Cora picked up the poker and stirred the fire. Ellie sat down by the table, hands flat against the wood like steadying herself. Miriam didn't sit. She walked to the shelf, pulled down her book, and turned to the inside cover. There, in faded pencil, was her own name, written in a child's hand from years ago, when she taught in a schoolhouse north of Laramie. She ran her finger across it. "I know who I am," she whispered, "even if they don't." That night the women cooked together, beets, potatoes, a stew that filled the corners of the house. No one said the words hearing or council or saloon. But every gesture at supper was quieter, every bite slower. In towns like Red Hollow, justice didn't always ride in with a badge. Sometimes it wore a collar and stood behind a pulpit, and when it did, it didn't shoot to kill. It shamed to break. Bo stood by the window after supper, watching the horizon go pale. He didn't say much, never did, but he looked at the dirt where Ellie's basil had started to sprout. And then he picked up a pencil, began sketching something, a room maybe, a schoolhouse, or something like it. He wasn't building a case, he was building a life. And it didn't need permission. Part 10, Church benches don't hold shame for long. The chapel's bell rang sharp on the morning of the hearing, not in welcome, not in grief, just a cold, clear sound that said someone's being judged today. Red Hollow's folk came in slow, not out of interest but obligation, like stopping to watch a fence post rot. The pews filled in odd patches, men in their Sunday shirts, women with tight lips and tighter bonnets. Kids kept close and quiet. Bo sat near the front, not by choice, but because there was no use hiding. Next to him sat Ellie, her fingers curled together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Cora flanked her other side, solid and unmoved. Miriam stood in back by the window, spine straight, book clutched in her hands like scripture. Preacher Hayes stepped up to the pulpit, voice low, deliberate. "We are gathered to question not souls, but situations. Red Hollow is a God-fearing town. When three women of questionable standing take residence under one roof, without vows, without structure, there must be clarity. Bo stood before anyone could ask him to. "I didn't bind them," he said. "I just opened the gate." A murmur, quiet but sharp, like a match striking inside someone's pocket. The preacher blinked. "You claim no authority, no marriage, no guardianship, yet they remain under your roof?" Bo's voice didn't rise. "They remain because I never told them to go." He sat, and then Miriam stepped forward. No summons, no nod from the pews, just walked until she was before the altar. "I taught school for 12 years, she said. "History, writing, arithmetic. I taught the daughters of men in this room. I left because I was no longer useful after my eye turned. But I've been teaching myself how to stand again, how to speak when it matters. This matters." She stepped aside. Ellie didn't plan to speak. She hadn't meant to, but her legs carried her anyway. She didn't say her name. She just held out her hands, scarred, calloused, burn-marked, and red. "These were mine before anyone ever tried to own me," she said softly, "and I ain't giving them up again." Then slowly she opened her palms, revealing a small wooden chip. One word had been carved into it roughly with a knife. The word shame. "I found this nailed behind the saloon kitchen door," she said. "I scrubbed it off the walls, but it stayed here." She tapped her chest. "I don't carry it now." And she placed it down on the altar rail, like a tithe no preacher had ever asked for. A stillness followed thick as honey, until Alma Greeley, widow town's quiet gossip, stood up near the back. "They don't need to be loved," she said, voice dry. "Just left in peace." She sat again. The preacher cleared his throat. No sentence was handed down that morning, no verdict written, just a silence deeper than any hymn. Outside, the sky was overcast, but not heavy. The kind of day where maybe, just maybe, the land might finally get rain. Back at the ranch, Bo stirred the stew pot slow. No one said a word about what happened in the chapel. But when Ellie came in from the porch, she was humming, just under her breath. A tune no one knew, and she wasn't explaining. Some songs weren't sung for others. They were sung so you could keep walking. Of this tale, hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Part 11. Old fires can't burn what's new. The wind came hard that night, sharp with spring dust and old anger. Bo had just finished tightening the last hinge on the barn door. Cora had said it creaked too loud, woke her before the sun. He'd fixed it with a rusted nail and a steadier hand than he used to have. The kind of fix that held things quiet. Inside, the cabin was warm. Miriam was rereading a book she'd already known by heart. Ellie had placed basil leaves between pages to dry, the scent mingling with wood smoke. Cora was oiling the saddle she didn't plan to ride any time soon. It was a good night until the barn lit up orange. Bo smelled the smoke before he saw it. Not chimney smoke, this had bite. Pine pitch and straw and spite. He flung the door open just as Ellie screamed. Outside, Finch stood in the glow, his face streaked with sweat and madness, a bottle in one hand, a torch in the other, and beside him, Ellie's arm in his grip. "Shoulda stayed bought," Finch spat. "Ain't no man gives up property without a fight." Bo didn't reach for a gun. He didn't own one. Instead, he walked forward. Finch tightened his grip on Ellie's wrist. "Back off, preacher boy." "I'm not a preacher," Bo said. And then he moved, fast but quiet, like the way lightning starts with silence. He hit Finch low, drove him into the mud, and kept him there, not out of rage, but out of finality. Ellie had fallen when she got free, scrambled backward into Miriam's arms. Her hand still clutched the blade she used for peeling apples. Not sharp anymore, but clenched, like it might have still meant something. Behind them, the barn crackled louder. Cora had already run into it, bucket in one hand, wet blanket in the other. Flames kissed the beams, but she moved fast, like someone who knew how to fight chaos. And she didn't scream, didn't speak. She just moved. Bo dragged Finch by the collar through the dirt, dropped him at the front gate as the sheriff's horse clattered up the road. Morgan didn't ask a question, just looked at Finch, looked at the women, looked at the burning embers of a barn. "You got rope?" he asked Bo. "In the shed," Bo answered. The sheriff tied Finch like livestock and hauled him over the saddle horn, said nothing else, just nodded once at Bo, then at Ellie, and rode off into the dark. Later, when the fire was down to smoking timbers and the stars returned to their posts, the four of them sat on the porch. Ellie had ash in her hair, streaks down her arms. Bo offered her a damp cloth. She didn't take it. Instead, she said, "You didn't have to." "I know." And that was enough. Inside, the cabin still smelled like basil and smoke and old wood, but nobody checked the door lock before bed that night. They didn't need to. Part 12. No one asks. "When y'all leaving?" Anymore. The morning after the fire came soft, like the land was trying to say sorry. Ash still clung to the edges of the barn, but the worst of it had been saved. The roof sagged, blackened in one corner, but Cora had seen to it that the horses were moved before the flames got there. She was out early, hammering a temporary beam into place, like she'd been doing it all her life, steady as sunrise, wordless as prayer. Ellie planted basil beside the front porch that same morning, not in neat rows, just in a pocket of soil that caught the sun first thing. She dug with her fingers, no gloves, didn't flinch when the dirt hit her scarred hands, said nothing, just breathed deeper each time the roots caught. Inside, Miriam had turned the kitchen table into a school desk again. Simon, the neighbor boy whose mama had died last winter, sat with his elbows propped and his eyes squinting at crooked letters. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he asked about words like mercy and justice. Words Miriam didn't teach from books anymore. She taught them from the way she stood, even when her back ached. Bo made coffee like he always did. Same tin pot, same single cup. He drank it slowly, watching the steam curl. That second cup, the one that used to sit empty for his wife. He didn't set it out anymore. Not because the house was lonelier, but because it wasn't. Things change, he'd learned, sometimes without asking permission. The town didn't gossip much after the fire. Oh, they still whispered at the feed store, and Alma Greeley still wrinkled her nose at anything that looked like hope in dirty clothes. But no one asked him or the women when they'd be leaving, because folks only ask that when they think you don't belong. And now, no one questioned it. Not after the way Miriam held Ellie. Not after Cora stood between fire and livestock. Not after Bo used his bare hands to put a man in the dirt without ever raising his voice. The preacher's widow left a pie on their porch, said it was from the women's circle, though no one signed a note. The sheriff rode by now and then, just passed slow, tipped his hat, and one morning, while Ellie was pinning up laundry, the blacksmith's wife offered her an old shawl for the wind, not out of pity, just neighborly-like. No one asked any more how long they'd be staying, because nobody thought it was temporary. They were just there, living, not performing, not proving, not apologizing. And for the first time in a long, long while, the land around the cabin felt like it could breathe again too, like the wind had quit holding its breath, waiting for someone to ride away. Part 13. It ain't called a home, but everyone keeps coming back. Evening slid in slowly, the kind of dusk that soaked the land in gold, and made every broken fence post looked like a painting. The porch creaked under old wood and new steps, but no one minded. It had become a place to land, if only for a minute, if only to breathe. Ellie sat on the top step, her knees drawn close, chin resting on her arms. A breeze passed, light as a whisper, and this time she didn't flinch, not at the creak of boots behind her, not at the bark of dogs in the distance. Her shoulders stayed soft. Bo didn't say anything, just handed her a tin cup of tea and sat down beside her. Not too close, not too far, just enough space for comfort to grow into something solid. She whispered it like it might break if said too loud. "I don't flinch at boots anymore." Bo gave a nod, not the kind that ended conversation, but the kind that honored what had been earned. Cora leaned in the doorway, arms crossed but easy now. She heard Ellie's words and smiled. One side of her mouth only, like the other half, was still learning how. "'Cause your voice is louder than 'em," she said, tossing it off like it was nothing. But it wasn't. It was everything. Miriam came out last, book in hand, glasses smudged with smoke and thumbprints. She set the book down on the rail and walked to Bo. Her hand rested on his shoulder, warm and dry from dishwater. "You didn't fix us," she said. "You just didn't make it worse." Bo looked up at her, eyes squinting against the sun slipping behind the ridge. He didn't answer, didn't have to. That's the thing about kindness, it don't come with receipts. Just quiet. They all sat for a while, Ellie with her cup, Cora with her arms loose now, no longer guarding anything but peace. Miriam with her spine straight and her eyes soft. Bo, still in his work shirt, boots dusty but posture lighter somehow. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Out past the barn, the wind played in the laundry Ellie had pinned earlier. 3 dresses, a shirt of Bo's, and a cotton cloth Miriam had stitched with red thread. Slow and careful, like she was teaching herself patience again. Down the road, the sun hit the chimney of the old schoolhouse just right. The bell didn't ring anymore, but that didn't mean it had stopped mattering. Miriam planned to fix it before spring, said it wasn't right to let a place go silent. From the hill, the old preacher's dog barked once, then lay down again. No one came, no one left, and that, in its own way, said more than words ever could. Some places never get called home. There's no ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no first toast. But if folks keep coming back, if boots by the porch don't make you tense, if a silence can sit beside you without pressing down, then maybe it don't need a name. Maybe it's already what it needs to be. Part 14. A land without a name still makes room. By early spring, the frost had stopped clinging to the windows come morning, and the wind no longer bit. It simply passed through, soft as a sigh. Snow still crowned the ridge beyond the pasture, but the ground near the porch had started to breathe again, dark and damp and ready. Bo stood by the gate one morning with a hammer in hand. Not much for carving, but he took his time anyway. The plank was just an old board from the busted barn door, a piece of the past sanded down. He didn't write much, just enough. 4 simple lines. No name here, but if you're tired, there's space to breathe. He nailed it up, adjusted it once, then stepped back. Didn't say anything about it, just nodded to himself and walked on. That same day, a lone rider came down the rise. Dust on his coat, a quiet weariness in the way he held his shoulders. He slowed as he passed the gate, read the plank, saw the 3 women hanging wash in the yard, a man on the porch pouring tea. The rider didn't stop, just tipped his hat. Sometimes peace isn't a thing to chase. Sometimes it's a thing you stumble into and know better than to disturb. Ellie was pinning a damp bedsheet when she looked up and caught sight of the rider's silhouette fading into the horizon. She didn't wave, just watched, then turned back to her clothespins with a soft breath. A stillness in her bones. she hadn't felt in years. Miriam stepped out of the cabin carrying a crate of school books, setting them by the porch. The kids from Red Hollow had started trickling back, one by one, drawn by curiosity more than permission. She was ready for them this time, not as someone reclaiming a past, but as someone shaping something new. Cora hammered the last plank on the chicken coop. Chickens were hers now. She'd named them after gunfighters and saints, said it kept the balance. Inside the stove hissed. Coffee brewed low and steady. Only one cup sat on the table, like always. The other three were stored neatly in the cupboard, clean, ready, never assumed. Bo sat out front with his dog at his feet, the air thick with dust and hints of basil from Ellie's herb patch. He watched the light move across the field, how it touched the dry grass and made it golden again. He thought about all the things he never meant to do, never meant to bring anyone home, never meant to build anything new, never meant to carry more names into that house. But the world had other ideas, and sometimes letting it happen is the kindest thing a man can do. There were no signs in Red Hollow pointing to this place, no name etched on a map. But there was a worn path from town now, faint but growing clearer each day. Hoofprints, footsteps, bare toes in the mud, even laughter sometimes, because home doesn't start with a deed or a wedding vow. Sometimes it starts with a woman who dares to stay, a man who doesn't ask questions, and a porch wide enough for silence to feel like safety. The West never wrote stories like this in the papers, but out here in the slow light between storms, they still happen, and maybe that's enough. Out in the quiet, where fences lean and boots dry by the door, folks don't always say what they feel. But when someone leaves space for you without asking questions, without expecting thanks, that's a kind of love, too. This wasn't a story about saving anyone. It was about letting people stay, and sometimes that's more than enough. If this story settled somewhere in you, leave a comment, even just a word, like it if you'd offer someone that same kind of space. And if you want more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. We'll keep the fire warm till you come back.